Welcome back to the Founder Acharya series. Today, lesson 5. And after today's lesson, we'll be halfway through. Time flies. Lesson 5 is ISKCON branch. But before we get to the lesson, after a lifetime in preparation, our Founder Acharya's mission appears on the world scene as ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Before we examine how Srila Prabhupada manifested ISKCON in phases, let's look at and listen to his mood and mission as Srila Prabhupada himself expressed it upon arriving in America. So first of all, here's a map and the ship after 35 days finally really saying, Prabhupada can see Boston Harbor now. Oh, Atlantic, I see him on the bow. Did you notice when the ship was approaching the Boston Harbor, there was that, I circled in red, I said this building had Jagannath eyes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was put in there, or if that's just the way the building is, but it was pretty far out. So, at 5:30 a.m., the exact time of day when Srila Saraswati Thakur passed away on New Year's Day 1937, Srila Prabhupada's Jaladuta ship docked Commonwealth Pier. Every year the Boston devotees go up there and they do a little memorial on the day, September 17th, the solar day, that Prabhupada, the ship docked. And then while on the ship, later in the day, because the ship stayed there overnight, and Captain Pandya took Prabhupada around for about an hour just to show him a little of Boston, because the captain had some shopping to do. And so Prabhupada actually set foot in America on September 17th, 1965. And then he reboarded, and then while on the ship that afternoon, he wrote this poem, Markine Bhagavat Dharma, which means teaching Krishna consciousness in America. Now that poem was around since then in ISKCON, and then our godbrother Jai Sachinanda, back in the day, famous singer, Sanskritist, he set Prabhupada's poem to music. And in 1976, the last time Prabhupada visited LA in June, for about 10 days he was there, he got to sing it for Srila Prabhupada in Prabhupada's quarters in LA. And Prabhupada loved it. He loved the tune. And Jai Sachinanda was so happy that Prabhupada liked it. So, some years later, many years later, there was this Pandava Singh, the UK youth, tech-savvy Pandava Singh devotee, and I think it was 2009, on Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day at the Manor, this devotee made this offering, this multimedia kind of offering for Srila Prabhupada's pleasure. And so we're going to see a little video. He made an 11-minute video, and it's really extraordinary because as you see the video, you see how the meditation of the video's creator, a young man who never met Prabhupada physically, he's really close to Prabhupada spiritually by Vani. So what the video is you see slides moving. We're going to have to get out of PowerPoint. Slides moving. Then you hear Jai Sachinanda singing each stanza of Prabhupada's poem. And then the creator of I still don't know, I haven't met this person, I'd love to know who it is, but some devotee in the UK. He's, as Jai Sachinanda is singing each stanza in Bengali, then you see the English translation of each stanza appear on the screen. There are some glitches in it. You'll perhaps be thinking, oh, he could have done this better. But it's like pockmarks on the moon, right? It's a wonderful offering. So over the course of 11 minutes, you see highlights of Prabhupada's preaching lila from the ship until Prabhupada's on his disappearance bed, which is all on Monday, 12 years later. So it's very powerful, very moving. And now, with the help of Jesse, I did minimize it, it's there. You want to...
Okay, so now let's see if we get this out.
And at first, when you see the video, you won't hear any sound, but then quickly the sound comes in. Okay. It should be in the... Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's not.
That's what I saw.
Yeah, this is it, but it's not open on there. So it's... Okay, I see. It's right here.
Yeah, I had it paused. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
So what we're going to have to do... Let's see.
Okay.
Okay, let's make this work. Up here.
Okay, it's got to come on this way. So sound. Well, the sound comes in later.
Oh, okay. Well, I can double check the audio while I'm here anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good to go.
Alright. Just depause it and it should start. Yeah, come on. Okay. That's Jai Satya playing the drum.
कृपा कले कृष्ण यथा मेरा प्रदीप पर कृपा कले कृष्ण यथा मेरा प्रदीप गिला गिया निरहता करो वे गति गिला गिया निरहता करो কিছু কাজ তব অনুমানে আছে কিছু কাজ তব অনুমানে নহে কেন নিবে এই উগ্রসানে নহে কেন মারিবে এই উগ্রসানে রজস্তম গুণেরা শোভাইয়া জন রজস্তম গুণেরা শোভাইয়া জন বাসুতে তো তারুচি নহে যে প্রসনা বাসুতে তো তারুচি নহে যে প্রসনা তবে যদি তব কৃপা হয়া হয় দুঃখী তবে যদি তব কৃপা হয়া শ্রীকি সকল ভাব হয় তুমি কে দুঃখী সকল ভাব হয় তুমি যে দুঃখী কিভাবে বুঝালে তারা বুঝে সে রাজা দ্বারা বুঝেছে রসা এত কৃপা কর প্রভু করি নিজ ভাষা এত কৃপা কর প্রভু করি নিজ ভাষা চায় সব হয় মায়াব তোমার ইচ্ছায় সব হয় মায়াব তোমার ইচ্ছায় না মায়ার পরাস তোমার ইচ্ছায় না মায়ার পরাস হয় যদি আদেশ তবে ইচ্ছা হয় যদি তাদের বুঝিবে নিশ্চয় তোমার কথা যে তোমার বুঝিবে নিশ্চয় তবে কথা যে ভাগবতে কথাতে তবয় অবদান ভাগবতের কথা সে তবয় অবদান ধীর হইয়া শুনে যদি গানে ধীর হইয়া শুনে যদি কানে হাতে তবে পাইবে নিশা রজস্তম হাতে তবে পাইবে নিশা হৃদয়ের ভদ্র বুঝিবে হৃদয়ের ভদ্র বুঝিবে
That's Jai right there.
করে বুঝাব কথা বড় যে যাই কি করে বুঝাব কথা বড় সে যাই ক্ষুদ্রায়নি কি নাহি না কোন জাতি নাহি ক্ষুদ্রায়নি কি নাহি না কোন জাতি নাহি চয়ন প্রভু কথা বলিবারে অত চয়ন প্রভু কথা বলিবারে যে তোমার ইচ্ছা প্রভু গরবে ভারে যে তোমার ইচ্ছা প্রভু গরবে ভারে অখিল জগৎ গুরু বচন যে আমার অখিল জগৎ গুরু বচন যে আমার অলঙ্কৃত করিবা গমতা কৃপা হলে মন কথা সুধা হবে তব কৃপা হলে মন কথা সুধা হবে শুনিয়া সবার শোকা ধোকা যে ঘুচিবে শুনিয়া সবার শোকা ধোকা যে ঘুচিবে আনিয়াছ যদি প্রভু আমার না যাবে নাচা নাচা প্রভু নাচা সে মতে কাশের পুটালি চতা নাচা সে মতে কাশের পুটালি চতা নাচা সে মতে নাই বেদনায় নামে কুদর ভক্তি নাই বেদনায় নামে কুদর ভক্তি বেদান্ত নামে বেদান্ত কর ভক্তি বেদান্ত নামে বেদান্ত কর ভক্তিরে সাধনা মেরে সাধনা কর
Maybe that wasn't him.
Sounds like that.
Now that you say that. So, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but what do you see in Prabhupada's face? Raise your hand.
Compassion.
Yeah, there's many things in that expression, but the overarching mood of Prabhupada is compassion. That's why he came. Otherwise, why would he come? Why would he come to this Ugrastane, as he's saying? Ugrastane, this horrible place. In the mid-70s, there was a Newsweek piece by a reporter named Tony Hatch. And because there was such a spike in Guru Swamis and yogis coming to the West in that time, this reporter he went up to the Himalayas looking for the proverbial yogi on the bed of nails, and he found one. And the guy spoke English. And the reporter was very impressed by his high consciousness. And then he said to the yogi, you know, I travel all over the world and I see a lot of suffering. Have you ever considered coming out of the Himalayas and sharing your wisdom and your enlightenment with the masses, the suffering masses? So the yogi gave a classic yogi answer, which Prahlad Maharaj in the Bhagavatam pans. The yogi said, it is said that the well does not go to the thirsty must come to the well. So contrast that kind of response to Prabhupada's response to the suffering of humanity. To continue his metaphor, Prabhupada traveled all over the world, starting an irrigation project, the Sankirtan movement. So that's our Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so again, the devotee who made this video, he never met Prabhupada physically, but boy, he's really close to him spiritually. You can see that. So it's powerful evidence that being close to Prabhupada, having a deep foundational relationship with Prabhupada, has nothing to do with Rapu, having never seen him physically. There are leaders in our movement, direct disciples of Prabhupada, who never saw him. But they really get a lot of mercy by following his instructions and being in his mood and serving his mission and knowing his life and applying his teachings. So, I got this when I was serving in Hawaii in 2009. Urmila had just come from England, and she had gotten a copy. She saw this, the Vyasa Puja offer, and she begged a copy, so she gave a copy to me. So I just immediately, I just kept it, and then when I started researching the seminar, I thought of this, this has got to go in. Alright, so we have to get it back into PowerPoint.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was really, really cool.
Yeah, it's
Really
amazing.
appreciate you sharing with us.
Yeah. Okay, so here we are. Prabhupada writes the poem, and then the next day in September 17th, 18th, yeah, the 19th, they go down to, from Boston down to New York. Finally, Prabhupada gets off the ship, and as Prabhupada told us, I did not know whether to turn left or right. He was that, unknown. He was unknown in America, and America was unknown to him. But because Gopal Agarwal was thoughtful, he sent someone from the organization called Traveler's Aid, and the man escorted Prabhupada to the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City. And Prabhupada got on the bus and rode all the way across Jersey and all the way across Pennsylvania, which is a long state, kind of like Tennessee. And finally, around 2 in the morning, the Greyhound bus pulls into Butler. And Prabhupada is greeted. So let's go. Oh. Come on.
Do we have to do anything on the computer?
I'm just turning it off and on. When in doubt, reboot, right? It's not there. Yeah, you gotta get. He's gotta get it on the screen. Prabhu, you gotta get us back in sync here. What's on the screen? There you go. Put it in. You see slideshow and current slide on the up top. So current slide. Okay.
I think it's working. Give it a try.
Yeah, we just gotta go to the slideshow. Not there. Full. Yeah. This is a funny thing where we gotta do it twice in order to get it in. No,
It's gonna go back. All gotta go back again. Yeah, that's weird. Well, we can try and reboot again.
Yep, just get out. Get in. Any questions or comments so far? Well,
Where's the...
where? Here. Okay, slides. There we go. There's many slides. 5 here. You know the right one. Well, this is a relatively short lesson, by the way, so there should be plenty of time for Q&A. But do keep your questions, because we are going to do that Monday, the 21st. No, exactly. Yeah, let's see. Slideshow. Slide. Yeah. All right. Okay. Lesson 5 is ISKCON branch. We had the seed, the roots, his mission's roots. Now we're continuing the metaphor of his ISKCON branch. Tompkins Square photos of Srila Prabhupada in October 1966, and then a more current one. 3 aspiring Vaishnavis. Oops. Transcendental tree huggers. 3 aspiring Vaishnavis more recently hugging the tree. Anybody been to the tree? Yeah. Oh, okay. When you go to New York City, there's a few places you must go to. 22nd Avenue. Of course, the Bhakti Center now is really happening. Tompkins Square Park, which is not far from 26th. And let's see. The background is all different now. But right here there's a little sign. It says Hare Krishna tree. And then there's a fence now, kind of near the tree, because Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, on this fence that's near the tree, he put a big brass plaque. This is the tree where A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami started the Hare Krishna movement. And the New Yorkers are very proud of that. They're very proud of being able to accommodate any exotic person, place, or thing. So when Prabhupada came, it was startling just to see Srila Prabhupada, but this is where he launched the movement. So the last time I was there at the tree was 2012. And there's a bench right by the fence. So I just was chanting there. And sure enough, as I was chanting all my rounds there, so it was more than a couple hours. And during the course of my chanting my rounds, devotees would come in, from different parts of the world. And they would circumambulate the tree, bow down to the tree. And then Satyaraj walked in. He's a New Yorker. And he saw me and he said, what do you think? He chants his rounds there too sometimes. I said, it's amazing. It's bigger now. It's 50 years on. It's a bigger tree. Taller. So, let's see here.
One quick question. That picture in the upper left corner there?
Oh, we're going to get to that right now.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. The 1966 photos from the East Village Other mark the start of Prabhupada's outdoor preaching in America. And especially the one on the left, because, the devotees bought the paper, then they brought the pictures to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada really liked them. And then they posted them in 26, on the wall. So when people would come in and see, especially that one, Prabhupada's. And that was used later, for the ad for the Contra rock bands. Yeah. So the people would see that, coming in. And the motive was to get high. That's why people came. So this is a new way to get high, right? And so they look at Prabhupada's picture, they say, he's so high, he got to hold his head to keep from flying away. Because it's amazing. Prabhupada's in ecstasy there. And then when Prabhupada saw this, he said, yes, this is the start of my preaching in America. This is the, kind of coming out publicly. And in the New York Times, that picture before of Chuck and Bruce dancing, that was the New York Times. So, a lot of recognition. Now this is 66, most of those pictures. 10 years later, in 1976, while celebrating New York City's first Rath Yatra, Srila Prabhupada compared ISKCON's appearance at 26 2nd Avenue to Lord Bohr's advent from Brahma's nostril.
Very cool.
From tiny to titanic in no time. So what happened in 76 was Jayananda Prabhu, his last really active Rath Yatra. Then in 77 he was masterminding the LA Rath Yatra when he passed away. He was driving Prabhupada around with a lot of devotees, because Prabhupada was giving the devotees a tour of places that Prabhupada said he went to. And he would walk around, the Paragon bookstore, the Paradox restaurant, and just different places that Prabhupada would frequent. And I did this here, and I was doing that there. Here's the park bench, probably where Mr. Rubin met him. He was like Elijah. he was telling me all, I have temples, I have books, but just time is now separating us from all of that. And part of the miracle of compiling his life story was Mr. Rubin turned up for an interview. That's why you see his words. That's why you see Mr. Rubin's words in the Lilamrita in planting the seed. Because in Vancouver, he turns up and goes, he's inspired somehow to go to the temple. Because then, Swamiji actually did do and everything he said he was going to do. And so he gave an interview.
Saw the Murti, right?
Hmm?
Saw the Murti and knew.
He saw the Murti?
Saw the Murti and knew that was Prabhupada.
Oh yes, something, yeah. I forgot that part, yeah. So then they went, so Prabhupada took them to 26 2nd Avenue. And in 76, it was still a little hole in the wall. And there was still the mobile filling station next door. So this is, because then Prabhupada made that analogy. Only Prabhupada can make an analogy like that. From Brahma's nostril, Lord bore, and then... So in only 10 years' time, we've covered the world. Srila Prabhupada's plan behind ISKCON's rapid expansion had 7 purposes. And that was the famous shot between 26 and Prabhupada's apartment. There was that courtyard. Anybody been to the courtyard? Yeah. So there's a bird bath and a bird house, and Prabhupada, somebody somehow imposed, somebody wanted to snap him there. And let's see. In March 1966, before 26, before Srila Prabhupada moved from the Bowery to the Lower East Side, Srila Prabhupada was consulting an attorney about incorporating, quote, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. When friends suggested Srila Prabhupada use the more familiar term God consciousness, Prabhupada replied that, quote, God was too vague, and that he had come to reveal Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. If I say God consciousness, they will bring so many gods. Right? From the East, they'll bring so many devas. And in the West, they have some vague conceptions of God from the Abrahamic traditions. Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah. But what is his Nama, Rupa, Guna, Lila? What are his name, form, qualities, and pastimes? That's what Prabhupada's come to give. Further, quote, Krishna consciousness was Srila Prabhupada's rendering of Rupa Goswami's phrase, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Matihi, that's from Panjavali 14, to, quote, be absorbed in the mellow taste of executing devotional service to Krishna. So in July, after Srila Prabhupada did get his own place at 26 2nd Avenue, he incorporated ISKCON with 7 purposes, and we saw that precursor of the first purpose in the League of Devotees Charter. Okay, so now we're going to read the 7 purposes. And then when you see these purposes, try to think, what's the overarching purpose? What's the purpose behind all the purposes? There is a common thread here. Okay, so... Krishna Shrai, you want to read?
To systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large, and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life.
And then dot, because there's more to each one, but I just put it up to get the gist so we can fit in all. Techniques of spiritual life as explicated or something in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and allied literatures, Prabhupada said. Okay?
2. To propagate a consciousness of Krishna as it is revealed in the Bhagavad Gita.
I'm sorry, that's where you named the other one. Okay?
3. To bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna.
The prime entity, Prabhupada said.
4. To teach and encourage the Sankirtan movement, the congregational chanting of the holy name of God. 5. To erect for the members and for society at large a holy place of transcendental pastimes. 6. to bring the members closer together for the purpose of teaching a simpler and more natural way of life.
Jai. New Talavana.
7. With a view towards achieving the aforementioned purposes, to publish and distribute periodicals, magazines, books, and other writings.
Our family business. That's how Prabhupada envisioned the whole enterprise would be supported. So especially both in the first purpose, to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge, and the last purpose, and in between too, but especially those really highlight the purpose behind the purposes. If you had to put all these purposes in one department in a university, there's many departments, science and humanities and what have you. Many universities have this department. Department of what? What's ISKCON for?
Consciousness.
Well, you wouldn't see that in the university necessarily. They don't even know what consciousness is. But it's think of a department that already exists in the university. What do we...
Human relations.
Who said? I heard it.
Education.
Education.
Oh.
Yeah. This is an educational movement. Tamasima Jyotirgama. Don't stay in the darkness. Go to the light. Yeah. So that's really what we're all about. We're about becoming educated and educating others. So, let's see. Okay, 7 purposes. Prabhupada's plan. 7 purposes in 4 phases. So raise your hand if you can tell us where Prabhupada is there.
He's in Butler.
Yes? Were you there when they had the... Did you go? They've been there, the devotees. They've been in Butler. Yeah, Sally Agarwal, she very shrewdly, when Prabhupada arrived, as he is, in full sannyas dress, Butler, PA, to this day, is a small town. There's an old saying, God made the city, or God made the country, man made the city, and then one journalist quipped, and the devil made the small town. Because everybody knows everybody's business, right? So Sally Agarwal knew that when the residents of Butler, PA got a look at Prabhupada, they might, this is before the days of 911 too, who knows what they would have done. So Sally Agarwal did a preemptive strike. She called up the Butler Eagle, the newspaper, and she said, "Hello, my name is Sally Agarwal. I just thought I'd let you know that for the next few weeks, I'm going to have a real live Swami from India in my house, and I thought you might want to do a story on him." So the newspaper would alert everybody that there's a mystical person in our midst. So they said, sure. So they came out, and they had Prabhupada pose in front of what looks like some kind of oriental art that Sally had hanging up. Significantly, what's Prabhupada holding?
Bhagavatam.
Yes, one of his Indian Bhagavatams. So there's another hint right there that he's about educating. He's about educating people. Whenever Prabhupada was interviewed or snapped with a photo, he didn't just play that role, but he was there. He had come to preach. Like you're saying, this is a man with a plan. So Prabhupada, he's there. He looks very intent, doesn't he? He looks humble, but he knows what he's come to do. He hasn't come to America to go to Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon or Disney World. He's come, as he would say to the reporters, like famously in London, "I have come to teach you what you have forgotten." And what is that? God. So in 4 phases, because, let's see here. Yeah, humble and determined, Srila Prabhupada is truly, quote, a man with a plan. Now, His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Swami discovered, actually, by examining Prabhupada's pre-USA writings, Prabhupada's 4-phase plan in Prabhupada's letters to India's leaders and in his India BTG articles after Gandhi was assassinated. Extraordinary that Maharaj was able to do this. And he had an agenda, he had a reason to do this, because he wanted to see from Prabhupada's pre-USA writings where Varnashram, which is, if you know Maharaj, that's his focus, fit in to Prabhupada's strategy for making the world Krishna consciousness. So we're going to see now how, as I said, or as I showed you from Prabhupada's own words, he wanted to engage Gandhi in the mission, but Gandhi was assassinated, probably never saw Prabhupada's letter anyway. So then Prabhupada, in his letters to these government leaders, and when they ignored him, then in his BTG pieces, then he revived BTG, he articulated his whole plan in 4 phases, using Gandhi at each phase. It's fascinating, because everybody knows Gandhi to this day. You know, everybody reveres Gandhi. They didn't know him. So what we're going to do, and that's my names, you know, phase 1, holy names and holy books. That's not Prabhupada's words, but I've identified that. So you'll see in each phase, we're going to see how Prabhupada gradually unfolded the Hare Krishna movement, but differently, according to what Prabhupada called time, country, candidate. The phases didn't unfold in the same sequence everywhere, which is very important for us to this day. A lot of the issues we have in ISKCON they could be solved if we really went deeper into how Prabhupada did everything according to time, country, candidate. What works in America, for example, doesn't necessarily work in India. Okay, so let's go to each phase. What we're going to do is we'll show you pre-USA evidence for the phase in Prabhupada's writings. And then we're going to go to what the application was, how Prabhupada applied those phases to spread Krishna consciousness through ISKCON. Okay. We will now look at each phase of Prabhupada's plan as he conceived it in India and applied it later to ISKCON. When Srila Prabhupada started ISKCON, his first canto Indian Bhagavatams were the only books, though he did read and teach from his unpublished manuscripts of BTG and TLC. Okay. Alright, so let's start. Holy names and holy. Here's the pre-USA evidence. Prabhu, you want to read that one?
Leaders and politicians may take lessons from the life of Mahatma Gandhi in respect to his daily evening prayer meetings and regular recitation of Bhagavad Gita. Reciting the Gita makes one able to get rid of the demoniac way of life and gradually rising up to the plane of pure devotional life of the gods.
Yeah, so Gandhi was famous for these prayer meetings. That's where he was assassinated after coming out of a prayer meeting. So, and Gandhi would quote the Gita. Of course, he didn't really understand the Gita as it is, but he was, well, we have that on the Gita we distribute. When doubts stare me in the face, you know, that quote from Gandhi. When I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I read a verse from Bhagavad Gita and it gives me comfort, or something like that. We have a Gita. Anyway. So, and then he would also chant, especially Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram, Sri Ram Jai Ram. So he was doing books and holy names. So Prabhupada used that. So let's look at the application when he came to the States. Okay,
Holy names, from temple kirtans to Harinam Sankirtan in the streets, parks, plazas, arenas, and beaches of the world. Holy books, from temple classes to systematic courses, from BTG distribution to book distribution.
Yeah. The first recordings we have at 26, of course we have that February 19th, 1966, Prabhupada recorded himself dictating the introduction to the Gita. But most of the, or a lot of the, well, that's what it is. It's kirtans. You hear Prabhupada leading, and then those first people are just trying to follow. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It was long kirtans. He was saturating their consciousness with the holy names. And then you hear his classes. Very basically Bhagavad Gita. And then finally in the fall, Prabhupada started reading from manuscripts, teachings of Lord Chaitanya. It became that. And those are the first two books. TLC actually came out a little before that purple, heavily edited Gita by Macmillan. So holy names and holy books, that was the program. And he was invoking, before he was invoking Gandhi, who did the same thing. So after holy names and holy books, Srila Prabhupada often introduced the following phase. Okay, right, Prabhupada there? Right. Ram Navami, 1975, Prabhupada was really ill, physically, but he roused himself and he did the inaugural arati, and then he was so inspired that even, it's after he did the Kanch, I'm not sure if it was before or after the Shringa prayers, but he just stepped out to the front of the stage and he just was inviting everybody to take advantage of Krishna Balaram Mandir. We're going to have educational programs, kirtan, association to go, this temple's for you. He was just inviting everybody to come. It was really nice. So, temples and deities. Let's see how Prabhupada used Gandhi for that.
His pre-ISKCON plan, temples and deities. The mission of the Gita Nagari must have its aim to rectify the anomalies that have entered into these centers of spiritual education and regenerate them to the sense of spiritual life through the exemplary life of devotees.
Mm-hmm. You notice it's also a BTG piece. In 1956, Prabhupada, he managed to publish 11 or 12 issues, even though he was dirt poor, he was financially destitute. But he was keeping the mission alive in his heart by publishing BTG. And again, he's using Gandhi because, let's see here. So in this article, 1956, this is from a 56 BTG article. In that article, Prabhupada cited Gandhi's, quote, temple entry movement to show the crucial role temples play in a spiritual revolution. Unfortunately, the temples have become, as Srila Prabhupada wrote, quote, rendezvous of demoniac dance. So, I was puzzled by this. I knew that, in America, Elvis Presley had already hit the scene by 56, but I couldn't imagine Indians in the 50s, boogieing in the temples. So it wasn't that. So then I was presenting, this is a good example of how I learned from my audience. I was presenting, I forget where I was even, but the devotee knew, he was older, and he knew that sahajas were infesting the temples and doing grotesque imitation gopi dances. So rendezvous of demoniac dance. For example, grotesque sahaja dancing. Hence his plan to, quote, regenerate the temples. Prabhupada wanted his temples to be, again, places of education where consciousness would be uplifted. Hence his plan to regenerate the temples. From day one, Prabhupada intended ISKCON's temples to be centers of education, training, and uplifting spiritual association. The next phase of Prabhupada's plan is a good example of how he applied his plan's phases differently in different parts of the world. Let's go to ISKCON application of temples and deities. This is very interesting.
This ISKCON application, temple buildings, from renting storefronts to buying churches and castles to building our own temples.
Yeah, and the first temples, quote unquote, were these tawdry storefronts, like in 26 2nd Avenue and 518 Frederick Street. I mean, why? Why plant yourself in these crummy places? You know?
Was it cheaper?
Hmm?
Was it cheaper?
It was cheap. Cheap rent, and not only cheap rent, but those places were where the action was. You know, 518 Frederick was just a hop, skip, and a jump from Haight-Ashbury. And 26 2nd Avenue was right in the middle of the Lower East Side consciousness seekers, higher consciousness seekers. And then, as more devotees and funds became available, like when I joined in July 70, it was still, I mean, it wasn't where it is, you know, Boston Temple's in 72 Commonwealth for years, in 74. But when I joined in July 70, it was a former funeral parlor. You know, typical. Place was haunted. And it was 3 or 4 flights of stairs, and devotees running. It was the biggest temple in the movement in terms of numbers of devotees. There was 50 devotees in that temple, because it was where ISKCON Press was before the BBT got up and running. So you had all the artists there, you know, the famous early artists, and press people, editors. Jayagoda was there, and Hridayananda was a new brahmachari, but he was an up-and-comer. You know, I would find him in closets. I would open a closet to get a broom, and he'd be in the closet, and he'd thrust an index card in my face. He'd say, "Test me, slokas, you know, test me on this sloka." So, yeah, but it all worked. Satsarup Adhikar, he was married to Jadharani. He was the president, and it was a far out place, yeah. And all we did in those days, as you know, was we did Harinam all day, and we'd shifts. You know, the press people would go, and then this group would go, and that group. So from morning till evening. And then we even all went to the theater district at night because Hair was playing, and they ended Hair with chanting Hare Krishna, right? And so then the people would come out of the theater and see us doing Harinam on the street right in front of them, and they thought we were part of the play or something. And that's where Mangalarti came in, right that month. Yeah. So okay. So then, you know, like at the same time in LA, in June, they had just bought that Methodist church on Venice and Wansika, and to this day, it's there, you know, it's fixed up. And then in Europe, you know, they got all these castles, and then devotees started building their own temples. Okay, so temples, and then deities. So let's read that.
Temple buildings?
No, deities.
Oh, deities. From deity paintings to importing deities to crafting deities.
Yeah, there's an exception, you know, to that, because in San Francisco, right away, when Prabhupada found out that Sam, who became Shyam Sundar, could carve, then he had Shyam Sundar carve Lord Jagannath. And that's, of course, where Jagannath first appeared, by the grace of Malati, right? The 5-finger discount. We didn't call it stealing in the counterculture, we called it liberating the merchandise from the pigs. Prabhupada Swamiji said, were there more? Oh yes, there were 2 more bins. So Prabhupada asked Malati's new husband, you know, Melanie's new husband, first came their initiation. Yeah, first he got them initiated. So, and then he married them. And so Sam, I just saw in the memory again how Shyam Sundar tells the story of, he's carving the deities. He hasn't even given up smoking yet. You know, and so Prabhupada walks in to check on his progress, and there's a pack of palm malls on the top of Lord Jagannath's head. Right? So Shyam Sundar said, so Prabhupada, he was so expert in instructing me, he didn't say a word, he just took his cane and He just knocked it off the head into the corner. And Sam got the idea, maybe I shouldn't smoke. In fact, Prabhupada did say that. Not while you're carving deity or something like that. Okay, but mostly it was, like in New York City, Prabhupada asked Jadharani, the first lady in the movement and the first artist, to paint a picture that Prabhupada had brought with him of Panchatattva. So she did what we would say is rather crude, and later on she got better at it. And that was the first deity, so to speak. And then when Prabhupada would offer, he would offer his own little arti. And the new devotees call that bells. When Swamiji does bells, he's doing something with the picture. And then Prabhupada later, of course, taught them how to do arti. But first it was Swamiji with bells. And so importing deities, and Prabhupada, when he took his dancing white elephants, as he called the devotees who brought with him back to India, Prabhupada went to places and he started shipping deities from Jaipur. Started out in Jaipur. So that all these deities started coming into ISKCON in the early 70s, and that's why you have so many anniversaries. This is the 50th anniversary of, this year will be the 50th anniversary of Radha Landanishwar. Wow. In December, 69 to 2019. So, to crafting, and then devotees started making deities. Like in New Vrindavan, where I was living, Bhagavanananda, who was making deities. And then when Radha and Ramachandra were vandalized in 73, infamous incident. I wasn't there for the incident, but I was there when they came back on the altar 5 days later. This Kirtananda Swami telegram Prabhupada, can we mend the deities? And Prabhupada said, yes, we can do that. And then put them on the altar, have a grand kirtan. So the deities were vandalized on a Monday morning in June, early June. And then that next Saturday night they came back for Sandhya Arati. I have never been in an Arati kirtan like that in my life. It was 7 o'clock was the Arati. I think it was 7, yeah. And it was just curtains. And the curtains opened. And then we bowed down. And then we stood up and we froze. Because Radha and Chandra were manifesting themselves as more than deities. It wasn't quite Shakshi Gopal walking and talking, but it was obvious when you looked at them. They were looking at all of us, and the message was, are you ready now? Are you ready to give your life? Because at gunpoint, a devotee and a guest had dropped the forms. Anyway, that arti was... what happened during the arti was just completely transcendental. One of those windows of the spiritual world opened up. But I'll tell you later. Anyway, we got to keep moving here. Okay, so to crafting deities. So right in the beginning, with Lord Jagannath manifesting himself in a deity form, not more than a painting. It was perfect, as the way Shamsundar tells it, because that's how deity worship snuck into the Western world in the Haight-Ashbury district. Because anything went. Everybody was just completely open to anything, right? So the counterculture folks would come in, they'd see these unusual forms. Hey man, who's that? Oh, that's Krishna. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Far out, man. And then they just bow down with the devotees. They just accept it. Okay, this is God. So only in the Haight in 1967, in the Summer of Love. So Krishna knows how to do it. He knows how to sneak in his deity form. Okay, so phase 2, temples and deities, and then so the next phase of Prabhupada's plan is a good example of how Prabhupada applied his plan's phases differently in different parts of the world. You can read CC reference and a favorite Bhagavatam reference about time, country, candidate. One size does not fit all. So you have to know how to introduce things according to the context. Okay, here we go. This is the old. This is, you see this? This is 26, or this is 3764 Watsika. But it's it's in the old chapel. Before they moved into what we know as the temple room now. It was kind of like, where the Bhagavad Gita and multimedia exhibit is. So there's a young Vridananda Maharaj, a young Ramaswami, Vumapati, Karandar, Trikarari, Sudama. I think this is Vrindavan Vilasini. Is she still with us? Anyway, she's getting her initiation beads. So this is an initiation ceremony. I call it phase 3. I mean, right away, Prabhupada did have initiations because he knew he had to get us in and start building an identity as a devotee with us, because there was no supportive culture out in the world. It was just a wasteland of materialism. So right away, in the West, Prabhupada had initiations. He didn't do that in India because there was more or less a supportive culture. People knew, in a sense, Krishna. So let's look at this. Okay, is pre-ISKCON evidence for initiation congregation? John.
Phase 3, initiation and congregation. His pre-ISKCON plan. The third item is to take up the Harijan.
Harijan means person of God, children of God.
The Harijan movement. This movement is a spiritual initiation movement, and this should be organized in such a manner that people all over the world may take interest in it.
Yeah, what this is, Harijan movement. So one of Gandhi's reforms was he objected to the fact that caste Brahmins weren't letting low-class people into the temple. We're all Harijans, we're all children of God, people of God. Why are they barring these people from coming in the temple? So Prabhupada said, that's all right, yeah, we're all people of God, but to become fit to associate and serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all the Harijans have to be purified. So, taking Gandhi's Harijan movement, that is, proclaiming everyone, not just Brahmins, as people of God, to a deeper level, Prabhupada identified the disciplines and purifying practices of spiritual initiation as the way everyone can become fit to associate with and serve the Supreme Lord. Okay, so like we, in Nectar Devotion, we have Prabhupada quoting Sanatana Goswami, Yata kanchanacham jati kamsam rasavidhanataham. I forget how it goes. Last line is Dvijatvam jayate vinam. Just as dull bell metal can be transformed into gold in an alchemical process with a mixture of mercury, so even a dull, common, covered over human being can be transformed into a Vaishnava, into a topmost human being, by the process of initiation and following the disciplines that you promised to follow at initiation. So Prabhupada, he took Gandhi's Harijan movement, but he brought it to a deeper level. Okay, so that was in a letter, to Dr. Patel, the Deputy PM of India. Now look at this. Yeah, so his ISKCON application. John, want to read it? His ISKCON application.
His ISKCON application. Initiation early in the West.
Yeah, he had the Prabhupada Jesus protect us, get us in. Yeah.
Life membership early in India.
Yeah, life membership. So when Prabhupada took those first devotees to India in 70-71, he started with Harinam, and it was startling for the Indians to see Westerners, of course, chanting Hare Krishna in the streets, but there was pushback, because think of 1970-71, it was still the height of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West, and India was trying to be neutral. And they had long ties to Russia, mutual interest in each other's cultures. So the press in India thought maybe that these were CIA people. And the CIA had paid off the Swami to smuggle some Americans in here. And plus, that was one suspicion. And the other suspicion was that these people can't really be Vaishnavas. They must just be, this is a new edition of the hippies. And they're just getting high. You know, it's some new psychedelic thing. They're high on psychedelics, and that's why they have these blissful looks on their faces. And the movie came out, you know, Dum Moro Dum, puff after puff, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Dum Moro Dum. So, it was depicting the devotees as being very licentious, just like those Upasampradayas, and not really being real Vaishnavas. So you had this either CIA perception, or you had this druggy, hippie, psychedelic thing. And so Prabhupada knew that. He could see what was happening. So he temporarily stopped Harinam. I mean, it's the Yuga Dharma, but Prabhupada stopped it temporarily, and then he said, now we're going to start life membership program. So he brought the devotees, his dancing white elephants, with him, because Prabhupada was respected as a, you know, he'd given his Bhagavatams to Shastri, he was a scholarly person, he was a saintly person. He started bringing the devotees to the homes of very wealthy businessmen and government people. And he expertly persuaded them to help him spread Sanatana Dharma all over the world. And he would introduce us as, you know, this person, they're coming from a wealthy country, they don't need to follow me, but they're willingly following me because of our own culture, which we're forgetting in India. So a lot of those people that Prabhupada preached to, they became good allies. You know, like for example in Juhu, all that trouble that Mr. Nair gave Prabhupada and gundas and guns and threats and demolishing this and that. And so one Mr., I think it was Mr. Sethi, who passed away recently. He had a construction company. He was a wealthy man. And so when he heard that Mr. Nair was threatening, you know, to demolish what they had built and bring guns, you know, so Mr. Sethi said, well, I'll bring my guns. I have a construction company, and to do business in India, you've got to guard it, you know. And so he himself personally and some of his well-armed people came on this all-night vigil just to make sure that, and they didn't come, they didn't show up, but other times there was more trouble. So life membership early in the West. Now how did we get our life? In Prabhupada's time there wasn't much in terms of life membership. The first thing that happened, you know, when the movement was growing like anything, then there was a reaction amongst frightened parents. They became vulnerable to the so-called deprogrammers, who, for a hefty fee, they told these concerned parents, I'll get your child away from this cult, and you'll get him back, and don't worry about it. Right? So, not all parents were like that. A lot of parents appreciated what Prabhupada was doing, how they was improving the life of their kids. And the first one I know is Rose Forcash, who was the mother of the late Leela Shakti, and she also just passed on recently. And she started something called Friends of Krishna, which became Friends of Lord Krishna, folk. Mm-hmm. So that was not really a life member, but it was, you know, it was something like that. And another thing that happened, it didn't really come in big time until, how did we get our first congregation in ISKCON? Well, I don't know about where you were, if you were in ISKCON, but where I was in the East Coast temples, sometimes it would happen like this. Prabhupada left the planet in November 77, and then we started getting older, and we were all pretty much brahmacharis, brahmacharinis. There were some householders, but it was kind of a renunciate movement. Prabhupada put us all on these Paramhamsa pedestals, right? We're all like pure devotees, we can do anything. And then we were getting older, and so one by one people started doing the unthinkable, leaving the temples to get a job and get married. But the people who were still in the temples, they didn't like that very often. So they felt a little betrayed when someone would leave the temple. Prabhu, no, you're just going to fall into Maya, because it's true. When we joined the temples, there was no supportive culture out there. It was just all materialistic. So their concerns were well-founded, but actually it was kind of natural. Most people do go through the Grihastha ashram. So they would go out and then establish themselves and get married. But then they did something else. They would come back to the temple. When? For the Sunday feast. And for the festivals. But then sometimes, depending on what temple you were in, those very people that had been inside the temple, who had been trained, then they were ignored. Oh, we know where he's at, or we know where she's at. You can't preach to them. Right? But then they didn't go away. They kept coming back, despite the attitudes. And then finally it began to dawn on the people left in the temple, well, I guess these are our people. They're not going away. And they constituted the first congregation very often. The people who had been trained in the temple. So you see how different it was in India, because Krishna culture, at least superficially, was known. Like sometimes Prabhupada would say, if you scratch an Indian just below the surface, there's a devotee. We're going to do questions at the end. I see you. You're trying to ask something? Or? No? I mean, you... Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, so see how different it was. And now today, what do we have? John, want to read? And now worldwide...
Now worldwide, congregational ministry. Namahata programs.
Bhakti Riksha
programs.
So now it's a congregational movement. Most devotees, mainline committed ISKCON devotees are living in the congregation. And that's normal. It's natural, as Kaladri Prabhu once told me. He was with Prabhupada a lot at the end. And Kaladri said, Prabhupada told me that, eventually the Hare Krishna movement will look nothing like it looks today. Prabhupada did what he had to do to launch it, but we old-timers now, of the first generation, we say that too. Oh yeah, it wasn't, the way it is now is nothing like it was when it started. But that's natural. We don't have to lament or just talk wistfully about the old days. We can go with the new times and adjust and adapt and do what Prabhupada did. Make the best of it. Best use of a bad bargain, Prabhupada would say. Okay, so that's phase 3. And let's see what else I have here. Yeah. So the fourth and final phase of Srila Prabhupada's plan embraces the whole world. We're still preparing ourselves to execute it, still qualifying ourselves to enact the fulfillment of his preaching mission. The V word. Dun, 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 dun. I always thought this was Prabhupada New Talavana. You know where it is? No, it's in Europe, because I was presenting this seminar in last year, 20...
Is it New Mayapur?
Yes, it's New Mayapur. Who said that? Okay, yeah, it is. Because you're a student of the images and the sounds, so you know just by seeing. Yeah, Prabhupada they were going from Orly, I think it was before CDG, Charles de Gaulle Airport, down to New Mayapur. It's a good 4-hour drive, even more. Prabhupada had to answer the call of nature. And then you see other pictures where he's sitting by a Citroën automobile, and he's taking lunch. So then they turned Prabhupada's stop to answer nature's call into a picnic. They broke out the prasad, and they had lunch there. So that's just, some place en route in deepest France. Le Massif Central. Okay. So let's look at some pre-USA evidence of phase 4. Rishi Prabhu.
The fourth item is to organize the much discussed caste system as the solution of natural division of human beings all over the world. Nationalistic division of human races is artificial, but scientific division of the caste system by quality and work, as envisioned in the Bhagavad Gita, is natural.
Yeah, Prabhupada didn't shy away from the phrase caste system because Krishna mentions it in the Gita. Chaturvanyam Mayashastam Guna Karma. That's the natural vibhagasha in these divisions. The natural division is by quality and work. We're all the same deep down, we're all spirit souls, but we become conditioned by different combinations of the modes of nature. So Prabhupada's saying, this Gita Nagari project that I'm proposing to you, we're going to educate people properly according to their natural guna and karma. And we're going to take a look at the real importance of this in Lesson 7. Prabhupada really was emphasizing it the longer he was with us.
Is that Lesson 6?
Lesson 6. Yeah, you're right. To properly honor Gandhi, Prabhupada encouraged India's Deputy Prime Minister to assist him in promoting the Bhagavad Gita's natural and scientific organization of humanity to bring peace to the world. Now, prior to writing India's Deputy Prime Minister, in the wake of Gandhi's assassination, Prabhupada wrote an essay envisioning a spiritual community, the Gita Nagari. Based on the Gita's teachings, Gita Nagari was to be a pastoral village where the Bhagavad Gita would be sung and lived. Okay, so here's an excerpt from what we came to call the Gita Nagari prophecy. Deva?
When the Gita Nagari will attempt to harmonize such sweet relation between man and God, man and the world and God, at such an auspicious time only, the United Nations' effort to establish peace in the world will be successful, or the dream of a caste society, spiritual equality all over the world, will be realized in practice.
So the whole essay, available on the Bhaktivedanta database, represents Prabhupada's first attempt to name and describe the mission he inherited from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. His second attempt was the League of Devotees, described in Lesson 4, and when he finally took his mission to the West in the 1960s, it rapidly came to stay on the world scene as ISKCON. So, so now we're going to look at ISKCON's application of Varnashram. Deva.
I've only done 50% of what I want to do. The farms will have to be done. If they are established, Varnashram will be established.
Mm-hmm. And here's a corroborative reference. Brahmananda Swami asked Prabhupada if he had any regrets, because it was becoming obvious that Prabhupada was leaving. And Prabhupada said, no, I have no lamentation. And then Brahmananda was leaving, and then Prabhupada said, no, actually I have one lamentation. A devotee, and Brahmananda asked, because you have not finished translating the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a good guess, because wherever Prabhupada was, that was like his life's work. He could not go without translating. Prabhupada replied, no, that I have not established Varnashram. And that was from an interview with Abhiram, who was Prabhupada's nurse most of that year. And Prabhupada, at another time, he said, because he traveled one last time. He wanted to do one more world tour, even with practically no body left. So they carried him out of the plane, and he got as far as London. But his plan was to go to Gita Nagari. And then what will you do, Prabhupada? Sit down and show you how to live in Varnashram. But he never got to do that physically, but it's all there in his Vani. But because we haven't mined that Vani well enough, haven't focused on that well enough, we haven't done it. Because basically we're afraid of it. In the next lesson, we'll look closely at what the Varnashram phase of Prabhupada's mission is, as well as what we have to do to prepare for it. So at the end of this lesson, I do step to the threshold of Varnashram, which we have, that's basically where we're at. We're at the threshold. So, in the next lesson, we do a lesson on that. Okay, so application. To this day, ISKCON's Varnashram application has barely begun. So when we do the Q&A, don't ask me about Varnashram. Ask me tomorrow morning at the Q&A, because that's where we're really going to do it. Okay. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to describe Prabhupada's mood and mission as expressed in the Vyasa Puja video that we viewed, as well as what that offering tells us about how to know and be close to Srila Prabhupada. 2. Identify ISKCON's 7 purposes, as well as its overriding purpose. And 3. Identify the 4 phases of our founder Acharya's plan to spread Krishna consciousness worldwide. And then a preview. Yeah, there's the founder Acharya pose. There's the BBT caption there. Transition. With a better understanding of the conception and unfolding of our founder Acharya's ISKCON mission, we are now ready to take a closer look at its unfulfilled phase, Varnashrama, why we have been reluctant to embrace it, and what we must do to approach and realize it. Okay, I'm going to pull the chair here. Sitting in this chair this morning by the fire. Very homey. Okay, there's Yogendra.
First questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, concerning the development of the congregation, my experience is in New Orleans, and I assume to some degree, certainly a large degree, all over the rest of North America, it was something like this. Our congregation was transient hippies. But then on the other extreme, when Indians started migrating to America, we would take the phone book out and look up all the Indian names and call and invite them to the Sunday feast. And that we had this congregation of Indian people and transient people. So I just wanted to share that. And then concerning the very last part, you said not to speak about Varnashram, but this isn't Varnashram. It had to do with what you were talking about, Prabhupada going to Gita Nagari and sitting down. So when Bhakti True Maharaj was here, and simultaneously Bhakti Raghava Maharaj, we got into a discussion about this. And Bhakti True Maharaj said, Prabhupada wasn't going to just sit in Gita Nagari. He was going to be there for a certain amount of time, and he was supposed to fly to Hawaii, where I was going to meet him.
Right. That's the last thing Prabhupada said to Bhakti True Maharaj, who was right there with him in Vrindavan. I will see you in Hawaii.
Wow.
Yeah. But Prabhupada was, just like when Prabhupada went to New Vrindavan in 69, he was there for 6 weeks.
Yes, a long time.
Yeah. May, June 69, because as you'll see in this next lesson, so not too much about Varnashram, this was Prabhupada's vision of how it actually would go all over the world. This is the alternative to the modern soul-killing civilization. But tomorrow morning. Okay, thank you.
I've noticed a phenomenon at 2 previous temples I lived in, at least, and probably elsewhere. When the congregation starts coming in there, they are like life members or people who share the background, or people who have some expertise in some spiritual interest. They're not initiated, but they have some expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed that it's really easy for them to start getting more like say-so, but then they
more power or something?
Yeah, because they have money and because they have expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And then where is the initiation still going to come in, and what is the initiated people are supposed to be leading it, because according to Prabhupada's directions. This is what I noticed.
Yeah, okay, that's a very good observation, and it's true, and this was brought up to Srila Prabhupada in the last year. I just finished hearing for the second time the whole last year. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's okay, you can bring them in. In fact, this came up in Toronto, which is a huge, maybe the biggest in North America. Toronto and Chicago were always neck and neck. So Prabhupada approved of bringing in people who had expertise, congregational members, but he was very, at the same time, he was very insistent that they be led and guided by the Brahminical people, the people practicing sadhana. So you need both. In fact, in that Gita Nagari prophecy, you know how Prabhupada foresaw that this Gita Nagari could be really launched? He said a coalition of Shuchis, which meant Brahminical people, and Srimatis. That means, people of wealth, people of means. You need a good head, and you need a good stomach to circulate, to distribute all the energy all over the social body. So that was interesting. It wasn't Kshatriyas in the beginning. It was Shuchis and Srimatis. So that's natural, that's good, but really people... Prabhupada always talked about putting your head back in society, so it needs to be guided very carefully. And so if we're not up to snuff, if we're not up to par with our being absorbed in Prabhupada's life, teachings, Buddha mission, the whole thing just gets splayed out, diverted. But what you observe is natural. It just has to be supervised properly. I saw him. Oh, you want to continue?
Well, one more. I just know that the head gets lost sometimes. The head is not prepared, and the head gets a little lost, and the stomach is practical and takes over.
Yeah, or the head gets co-opted by the money.
Well, that's lost.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's what you have today. The intellectual class, say in America, they're all bought and sold by the corporations.
And I mean the devotees. It's moving into the future so fast. The devotees, the head isn't necessarily ready. It doesn't know the practical steps forward. And the stomach people, the money, they say, well, we know because we're practical.
We're practical. It's all about money. That's for practical.
That's what we have happening.
Yeah, that's one reason we really haven't done it. Because we haven't been strong enough. I mean, like, just on a practical level, they took a survey. Who took the survey? I guess it was the strategic planning team. Surveyed the GBC of how many people have read all of Prabhupada's books. And lead and temple presidents. Yeah, it was at the last ILS. And an appallingly low number of people have read Prabhupada's books. What to speak of thoroughly, what to speak of knowing how to apply it. So if we don't know what's going on from Srila Prabhupada's perspective, then we're lost. You remember the ISKCON Foundation with Naveen Krishna?
Yeah.
So he did this in the 80s. He was trying to help temples recover, from the zonal Acharya debacle, and people were dispirited. And so he was going around. Before he even hit the road, he hired a consultant from the corporate world to figure out how to revive our organization, the ISKCON organization. So ISKCON is more than an organization, of course, but anyway, at least he was trying to do something, which was good. And then, so Naveen, he said, so I found a guy who was really good, a corporate consultant, and he did it, for dirt cheap. He believed, he thought we were good people. This is down in Florida. And the guy said, no, I'll help you guys, but I'm not going to do anything until I read your founder's teachings, his mission, what he wants to see. And so he read a lot of Prabhupada's books, a lot of the organizational stuff. And then he finally came back to Naveen and he said, if you people had just followed your founder's instructions, you wouldn't have to hire to talk to me. It's all in his teachings. Which was encouraging, because sometimes we think, oh, Prabhupada, he's maybe not practical, but he was the most practical. He was out of this world, but he was very down to earth too. That's why he said organization and intelligence, very much. Okay, so...
So, the 4 points, it seems like that as you go, like it was saying, like Prabhupada said, in the future, the things aren't going to be like that.
Externally,
So,
yeah.
so many times here in the temple, we're scratching our head, like why, how come it's still the older devotees still doing the brunt of the pujas and the dressing and all that? Is it, and you said it's a natural thing that's happening, that it's more congregational now. So how is it that it's a lack of, that we're not doing Harinam and we're not preaching? Is that the reason we don't have more Brahmanas in the temple? Or is it just this natural phase that's taking over that even our youth are, so many of them not initiated and kind of waiting as if, I don't know when, if they're ever going to come up to that. So what do we depend on?
Well, there's a couple of things. From a basic, there's two things. There's inward problems, inner problems, and outward problems. So, just historically, sociologically, I just went to this mantra retreat. Were you there at New Vrindavan?
No.
Okay. Well, one guest they had was Bert Rockford, the good friend of the movement, he just retired, but he's a lifelong professional sociology professor. So he was studying ISKCON, for 25, 30 years. And the GPC sometimes would ask his opinion, and he would just say, because I wasn't dependent on them for my paycheck or anything. I just told them straight, like that. So he gave a very nice talk on the evolution of the role of men in ISKCON, and for kind of a balance relief, we had a surprise visit from ladies. It was a panel discussion of ladies, and you could ask the ladies anything you want, the men, about how to relate to ladies. How could we better relate to the ladies? Right? And that was really good. It was a counterpoint to Burke's kind of presentation. So, one of the things Burke really appreciates about Prabhupada is how from day one he was the empowerer. He was the empowerer in chief. You can do it. Krishna will help you. Just like Prabhupada handed off his BTG passion to the devotees. And as Brahmananda and Gargamuni would say in the memories, we didn't know anything about starting the magazine. We didn't know anything, we barely even read magazines. So we went to Swamiji, and then Swamiji would just say, you can do it, Krishna will help you. That's the way the movement spread, as we know, as we hear from the memories, and as we know personally. Prabhupada said, long before Nike said it, Prabhupada said it, just do it. Just do it. The Lord in the heart will help you. The Lord wants it, Prabhupada wants it, so we just tried it. A 19-year-old Shivananda just goes off to Germany. Never been out of the country. And opens up Germany. He didn't know anything, he didn't know one word of German. But if the Lord wants it, and the pure devotee wants it, that's like we know Varnashram will happen. We know there will be, you'll see next lesson, a sea change in the way people live. Just out of necessity. So inward and outward. So yeah, it's very common, just even externally, that when the pioneers start something, that the next generation, the kids, just don't want any part of it. That was true in American history very often. And certainly we see that happening externally. Now internally, here's an internal, why that's true. So, let's see, this was Jamuna told me this. That she was hosting Radhanath Swami, and people who were following Radhanath Swami around, like a lot of Gurukuli graduates, the next generation, like Gauravani, Gauravani, Muni's boy, who's famous now, the Kirtaniya. Right? So Jamuna, while Radhanath Swami was visiting, she confided to him when the kids weren't there, the younger generation, that some of these second generation devotees, they're so good. They're such. She's talking about musically. They're on the verge of becoming famous on the level of Krishnadas and Jayu Tal and all these professional guys who don't follow any principles, but people like their singing. But I'm really worried because they don't have sadhana. They don't have sadhana, and so they're not getting the full Shakti they could get from Prabhupada because they're not keeping the disciplines of bhakti which empower them to spread Shuddhanam, real Nam, all over the world. And they love you, Maharaj. They stick to you like Velcro. So can you do something to inspire them? And Radhanath's first reaction was, I know from hearing their stories, that if I say one word, one prescriptive word about what they should be doing in terms of sadhana, they would fly away from me in a blink. They would think I would just be another fault finder, criticizer. But then he took what she said also to heart. So the next time there was a program at her house with Radha Maharaj and the coolies, 50-year-old coolies, or 40-year-old coolies, or whatever. Maharaj, in a very expert way, he started talking about his own experience, his own journey home, the book, and how, he was initiated by Ganga when he fell in the river. Then he met Prabhupada, and the initiation was consummated, and he heard Shuddhanam from the pure devotee, and how his experience of chanting Hare Krishna, which he had been doing, but then when he connected with Prabhupada, when Prabhupada kicked him out of that festival of 10,000 people and told Guru Das to go get that long-haired boy and bring him up on the stage, another Prabhupada miracle, how his experience of the holy names and his effect upon people multiplied exponentially. It was his way of saying, you guys could even be more effective, right? If you had better sadhana. So Gauravani bravely spoke up. And he said, Maharaj, you don't know what some of us, I guess I hadn't told him the worst of the worst, what some of us have been through, specifically with the holy names. When we were in ashrams, when some of us were in ashrams, in Vrindavan even, if we did something that was disapproved by our authorities, our punishment was to chant Hare Krishna. To chant, so many rounds. So that's how what many of us associate chanting Hare Krishna with, japa, punishment. And it wasn't just an excuse. Then, other people chimed in, and then it was like, so Maharaj just backed off, and then Jamuna said, I see Maharaj, what you're dealing with. But here's the good news. The holy names are so powerful, and even chanted, as we hear from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, resentfully or mockingly, or even unconsciously, it's Navabhas is so purifying that when I was at this October retreat, mantra retreat, Gauravani was one of the organizers. The stepson of Anutama and Gauravani. And so Gauravani, he was mainly in the audience, making comments, and good comments. And then he went up front, I think it was an open mic session after Burke had spoken, and he started talking about just this spring, his life is being totally transformed because he's been chanting 16 rounds. And he never even knew what that was. But it was, despite what happened, you see what I mean? That's the internal problem. We often, we have problems, and we carry those problems into ISKCON, and then Prabhupada told in my initiation, he begged us, Krishna consciousness is like sweet rice, but don't put any sand in the sweet rice. You'll spoil the whole thing. You know, if I have a nice cup of sweet rice from these cows, the real milk, and if there's sand in it, you know, because you got a lot of sand here too, then it spoils the whole experience. So he said, don't put sand in the sweet rice. You know, he was begging us, don't do that. You will spoil the whole thing. So it's just going to take, as Prabhupada told us, not you, not your children, not your children's children, not your children's children's children, but your children's 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 children. Maybe they will begin to worship the deity properly. In other words, it takes generations to really work this stuff out. So it's not surprising what we're experiencing. But it's all about being, like, take Varnashram. You know, why don't we have more people working cows and oxen? Because the people who read Prabhupada's books, very often they're just not inclined that way. Maybe they're more Brahminical people. But what we might consider doing is reaching out to the people who already like to do that stuff. Right? And maybe you're already doing that here. But it's not necessarily the core member's job to work the oxen and milk the cows. Although I met Jayanti, is that her name? Yeah. I met her. I was over there yesterday looking at the cows right around year 5 when she comes. And I said, oh, thank you for doing this service. Anyway, so, but the Hare Krishna movement can reach out to all the different varnas and inspire people who already like to do that kind of work, but do it in the service of transcendence. Do it for a higher cause. Get out of just like Gita Nagar, we had this student at Penn State, he was an ag major, and he was studying soil science, but it was all, you know, to exploit the soil and to exploit the animals. So then he read Prabhupada's books, and he got, because we were reaching out to those people at Penn State ag department. And so Bill became, I forget his name, Vaishnav. Vaishnav. Yeah, it's just going to take time, but it all is in Prabhupada's Vani, and it has to be mind, and I'm very grateful to Srila Ramaswamy for now carrying the baton, the Varnashram baton, because you know what's going on in Mayapur and around the movement, it's better than it was, in terms of strategic planning. It's kind of a corporate thing. Gopal Bhatta with his strategic planning, that's what they do in the corporate world. So maybe this is the ultimate paradigm for ISKCON. The ultimate paradigm is Daivi Varnashram. But we're not there yet. So at least it's not total chaos the way it was. Now it's organized chaos. No, it's a little bit more organized. And so Srila Ramaswamy is, you know, he's showing something, and he's doing something, and he's writing something. So it's going to take time. And as far as us being on another potential internal problem, you know, you've read Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. It's a famous self-help, you know, thing. M. Scott Peck, and he passed away. So he starts his book by describing a community that was dying. You know this introduction to The Road Less Traveled? Okay. So he tells the story, maybe you've heard the story, about it was a community of Christian monks, and they were dying, and they were getting less and less members, and the more the members were dwindling, the harder time they were having with each other, because they couldn't cover all the chores and everything. And then they met one day. They could see if they didn't do something, they were going to become extinct. So one of the monks said, you know, there's a wise man in the next valley. He's a rabbi, he's not of our tradition, but he's very wise. So why don't we invite him to observe us and be with us, and then maybe he can have some insight in how we can turn this around and not go extinct. So the rabbi came, and he was with them, and he interviewed all of them, and he heard their story, and then he finally had a meeting with all of them and said, you know, you folks have me baffled. I don't know why you're really dwindling. But I do know one thing. This is his expert advice, stratagem. One of you here is the next Messiah. And so all of them began to think, well, it's not me. I'm no saint. But they all began to treat each other as if they were saints. You know, Trinadapi Suniche, now what did we just hear there? Oh, I just heard it on the memories. That's the verse that we have to wear around our necks. That's, yeah, oh, it was by Asaki's memory, yeah. How humble Prabhupada is. So they began to treat, and so the Sangha became so sweet that others heard about it, and they began to come, and people started to join again. You know, so it's the only people we can change are ourselves, myself. And if I can change myself, then maybe others will be inspired. Yeah. So that's another thing. We're going to give the last word to our fearless leader, Indra.
Just on a note of inspiration, it's a Guru Kuli, also with the name Gura, but instead of Vani, it's Mani. And she has a following. Her band, her Kirtan band, has a following on Facebook of 30 million people when she sings Kirtan. Wow. And in India, she constantly gets crowds and the tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. In America, quite common in a yoga ashram, she'll pull 100, 150 people. It's an international band, and it's her and her husband.
She's from Nugaloka, right?
I can't remember. I can't remember where she's from.
I think so.
When she was little, she lived in Detroit with her parents.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
right.
she went to Hillsborough. Okay, yeah.
And Mother Urmila School.
Wow.
And so the good news is she's coming here?
And she did just leave Dallas, but you know, maybe one time we will get her band to come, you know. To get her band to come to the Calfest would be miraculous.
She passed a couple of years ago.
Maybe she could, if she upstaged the Mayapuri, that would be something, huh?
Well, her daughter lives in New Orleans, so she comes to visit sometimes.
Oh.
Wow. Old enough to have a daughter, but
Yeah, and she's married.
Her daughter is married and lives in New Orleans.
Yes.
I didn't think she was that old. You have a daughter
Yeah,
that
I
old?
don't know how old she is, but she's pretty educated too, Krishna consciousness.
Oh, wait a minute, Gauramani?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
she was one of the ones on the panel. We had some pretty amazing, we only had one senior lady, it was Uttama from Sharanagati, the brass division team. But the rest were like second gen, you know, real together, PhDs. And
her sister's like
Real
one of the
young,
head teachers in the
40s.
Dallas school. The
Right.
Dallas
Oh, yeah.
Gopi Gita.
Yeah, Gopi Gita, right? That her name? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so they're going to find their own way. Their way is our way. Yes. Oh.
I didn't say it was the last thing, but it's really short.
Okay.
I can just add.
Hare Krishna.
So I've been meditating a lot on the question we've been discussing most recently about why aren't there more people to take the places of the Vajaris and basically where's the new blood, and there's a really nice conversation 1974. It's actually the famous Varnashram College conversation, morning walk in Vrindavan, and Ridananda Maharaj is asking Srila Prabhupada, basically, how are we going to bring new people and stuff like that? Prabhupada says, if you are living ideally, the people will automatically come. And the context he's speaking about is basically simple living and high thinking.
Yeah.
So it's how you're practically living ideally, and also sure Bhagavad Dharma as well.
Yeah, you're going to see that. You're going to hear the words Prabhupada spoke, and that it sounds. You're going to see Ridananda looking at Prabhupada like totally amazed.
That same quote?
Well, not that quote. You're going to see another quote, but it's tomorrow morning. Stay tuned. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah, I did hear it. I was wondering.
Impossible not to go over. Yeah, you're anticipating very nice. Oh, did I ask you? Cornina Sunday, so did I ask about shaving? Not you, but
Oh, she did ask me. I'm not expert, but
she's good at that. I don't know. My hair isn't long enough. My hair isn't long enough.
but not for a buzz. Yeah.
It's for my. I have a cartridge, you know, it's for like.
Maybe one of the old timers did.
Yeah, but he doesn't shave his head.
Yeah, well, he does look like you know.
I'm saying that on Sunday it's the full moon, and I always shave my head on full moon, so I'm wondering if I should do that. To lift you. Maybe one of these.
I've never done that before, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I see it. The rupture is on the altar. He's going to shave. Yeah, that's true.
Maybe you'll get me to ask him.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. All I wanted to say was, after reading your email, I mean, you're like, is this your profession? You do this? Okay. So, I was kind of casually asking you that, but what I have to do, because this is a lot of time and energy, this is not for free. This is like, we're hiring you to do an assessment of our... Right? Okay. So what I have to... Yeah.
How's this business there? You got a real estate agent?
You get a lot of... I mean, how long can you do this? Okay. So you can do...
That's how it did this a year ago.
Okay.
Not mentioned people. So what can you do eventually? Try to sell it. Yeah.
Well, it's only like an acre and a half. Acre and a half is right in the middle of the city. But do you think something can still be done? Because there is dirt there, it's still dirt, not just all pavement.